From the Times Center in New York City, City University Television, in association with the New York Times, presents a TimesTalks series with editors and writers of the New York Times. Today's presentation, a conversation with Paul Krugman, Times interviewer Andrew Rosenthal.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Carol Olsen-Day of the New York Times. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this exciting TimesTalks at the Times Center. Tonight, we are enormously pleased to have as our guest one of our distinguished columnists. He's a must-read on the New York Times op-ed page, in print and online. Not surprisingly, his latest column, Degrees and Dollars, is on today's most emailed list. He also has The Conscience of a Liberal, which is the title of his blog on nytimes.com and, of course, of his best-selling book. He's also a professor of economics and international affairs at Princeton University and the 2008 winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics. You will hear from him in just a minute, but first I'm delighted to introduce our interviewer. He joined the Times in 1987, and among his many roles in the past 2 decades have been Washington correspondent, Washington editor, national editor, foreign editor, assistant managing editor, and deputy editorial page editor. He covered the 1988 and 1992 presidential elections, supervised coverage of the 1994 and 1996 national elections, and managed coverage of the presidential election of 2000 and the post-election day recount. In January 2007, he assumed his current role, editorial page editor. Please join me in welcoming Andy Rosenthal and our special guest, New York Times op-ed columnist, Paul Krugman.
It's nice. Okay. Nothing like a full house on a Wednesday today. We're going to talk about the national economy, the budget, Wisconsin, trains.
Right.
Paul did a posting on trains recently. And
got hundreds and hundreds of comments.
Hundreds of comments, yeah? And various other things. We were last here together in February of 2009. And at the time, Paul, you had not long before that won the Nobel Prize, and the economy was going straight to hell. We are here again, and everything has changed. You haven't won a Nobel Prize recently.
Not to my knowledge.
And the economy, I think, is not exactly, is maybe in the suburbs of hell now. I'm not sure where we are. Where are we right now? The unemployment rate's down, right?
Yeah. So, I learned something from my colleagues at Princeton. I talked to the political science people, and they say that how people feel about the economy has very little to do with the objective state and everything to do just with the direction. Mm-hmm. So, basically the president is reelected or the incumbent party is reelected. It doesn't depend what the unemployment rate is. It depends on whether it's falling in the 6 months before the election. And so right now, people are sort of, optimistic, even though objectively it's horrible. I mean, if you had said to anybody 4 years ago, well, we're going to have 8.9% unemployment in February, March of 2011, they say, you're kidding, that can't happen. And we'd have riots in the street, but it's down. The economy does, we learned something. I think the economy does slowly heal itself after a financial crisis, and we're watching that process of healing. It may be accelerating, but wow, it's still awful. Lives are still being destroyed by people who lost a job and cannot find another, and that's happening a lot. Duration of unemployment is at a record. But the economy is slowly getting better overall.
But that affects the unemployment rate. People just stop looking for jobs. Right?
That's right. The unemployment rate, the way it's calculated is based on looking for a job and not finding one. So if you give up, you're not counted in U3. There are other measures that are supposed to take account of that. And the other measures look not quite as good. But it's the thing is improving. It's gotten from absolutely awful to just terrible. That's basically the situation.
Well, that's encouraging.
Yeah.
Yay. Give me a T, give me an E,
right.
give me an R. Are we writing off, two generations of Americans, the ones who are never going to get a job and are older, and the ones who are coming out of college now and are entering into a recessionary job market and will never catch up?
Yeah, basically. I mean, there are a lot of, with a lot of damage in the middle too.
Uplifting. We'll get there.
Right, we'll get the uplift. I'm actually never good. I actually tend to end talks by saying, this is the point where I'm supposed to say something uplifting, and I can't quite come. Anyway.
You should watch, if you've never seen it, go on YouTube and see Loudon Wainwright's Paul Krugman Blues.
That's right.
It's very entertaining.
But no, I mean, so yeah, although it's hurting people all along the spectrum, but probably the worst victims are, first of all, the 58-year-old guy who's lost a job and probably is never going to find one again and is just trying to survive until he reaches 62 when he can take diminished Social Security benefits, and trying to not get really sick until 65 when he can get Medicare. Mm-hmm. And on the other end, the newly graduated college student who is, and we actually have some information on how long does it take, or how long is the damage to a young person's career if he or she graduates into a bad job market? And the answer is the rest of their lives. You never fully make up the loss from just having graduated from college in the wrong year. So there's a lot of that going on.
So any of you who are about to graduate, just stay in.
Hey, we have nephews.
Graduate school.
One nephew's in graduate school. The other is teaching English in Japan. It's we're really trying to keep them out of this market until it improves.
And then they're thinking about moving home. I remember when we were at that point in our lives, the idea of moving home after college was just you would die first. And why are these people voting Republican? Do you understand? Do you understand?
Oh gosh. I thought I'm the one who's supposed to make remarks like that. So no.
I'm sorry, if you're not a liberal, you're in the wrong audience.
A couple of things happened. One was failure to demonstrate, real improvement in the economy, and people. Again, what I learned, most of what I know about politics actually comes from talking to Larry Bartels and a few other people in the Princeton Politics Department, and they say again, people don't actually have views on policies. They say they have views on policies, but what they do is they vote based on what they see happening and what's happened in the recent past. And what happened was, as of the 2010 election, there'd been a lot of talk about how we're promoting recovery, but they hadn't seen much recovery. Mm-hmm. And so they voted no. And then there was a substantial number of elderly people who believed that the Democrats, the party that created Medicare and has always defended it, were actually going to gut it, and the Republicans, who have always hated Medicare and wanted to destroy it, were the ones who were going to protect it. And that's kind of an amazing thing. And there's a fair number of the don't let the government get its hands on Medicare type thing.
Right, and no national health care, but keep your filthy paws off my Medicare.
That's
program.
right. Yeah, it was very strange. I mean, you can ask, could it have been done differently? But it's.
What's the it here?
And Florida, the people of Florida, since we're being flipped here, the people of Florida voted in as governor a man they can count on to defend Medicare because he's made so much money stealing from it.
Right. I saw it. I really want to get to Wisconsin.
Look up Rick Scott if you have Google Rick Scott if you don't know what I'm talking about.
There is, and I'm sure that a lot of the people that want to gut it are also getting a lot of donations from people who make tons of money off of Medicare.
Yeah.
But is anybody seriously talking? This started at the national level.
Yeah.
We had the Senate today rejected both the Republican plan and the Democratic plan, if there are plans at all.
Yeah.
Chuck Schumer gave an interesting speech today in which he talked about this, 2-3 week thing is just insane. Yeah. Is there anybody who's talking about real serious management of our budget? I'm avoiding the words deficit reduction, deliberately here.
Yeah.
But, and who are they, and who should we be paying attention to now?
Gosh, the thing about people who are really serious about it, by and large, don't come out with specific plans now because the specific plan that makes any sense has zero chance of passing. And that's a lot of that is the politicians, though it's also the public. We have various polls. You ask people what they want. People want the deficit reduced. They want the deficit reduced without increasing taxes or cutting Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, or anything else except foreign aid, which is 1% of the budget.
Which is like a penny on the
right,
dollar.
Penny on the dollar. That, yeah. So we're not ready, and in some sense politically, to take this stuff on. If you take the general outlook, a fair number of people have reasonable outlooks, but what it always comes down to is that if you're serious about the budget, you're not worried about this year's deficit. This year's deficit is not a problem. The U.S. government is not broke. The U.S. government can borrow at 3.5% long term, and that's adjusted for inflation, that's just 1%, so they can borrow money very cheaply. You're worried about 10, 15, 20 years from now. And 10, 15, 20 years from now, as I wrote in one of the columns, the problem is healthcare revenue. It is overwhelmingly rising costs of Medicare and Medicaid that drive rising expenditure. If we can deal with that, fine. Then we've got a big thing, and even that's not quite enough, and it's very hard to see how you get the thing into balance without also having some revenue. So you probably need moderately higher taxes somewhere on somebody. I think the typical, if you ask people I talk to, if they're serious, they say what we do is we first have to have a really serious cost control on healthcare, and then we probably need a value-added tax. It doesn't have to be a value-added tax, but that's the one that is thought to be most likely to be politically feasible. And then with all that, then it's actually not a problem. I mean,
how important is it to roll back the tax cuts? Now it's presented as tax increases,
right.
But that's a problem at the highest levels of. Somebody told me recently, I don't know if it's true or not, that all of the wealth that's been developed in this country since about the last 30 years is in the top 1 or 2% of the country, and they pay less of their income in taxes than you or I do.
That's not quite true. That's even I wouldn't go that far. If
Don't
you actually
listen to
look
the
at
radio.
it, but it's true.
Which part?
It's not that all the wealth. Not that all the wealth has gone to the top 1 or 2%. But it's a lot. I mean, we've basically seen. Back 30 years ago, the income of the richest 1% of the country was something like 8% of total income. It's now around 20%. So that's a big share of the economy that's gone. A big share of the growth has gone to that top end. And yeah, effective tax rates on the top 1% are way down. That's a combination of things. It's a combination of actually lower corporate taxes, again, effective corporate taxes, and since that ends up being a tax on stock-related, on ownership-related income. That ends up being a benefit to people at the top. Lower, top marginal rate. Top marginal rate was 91% under that socialist Dwight Eisenhower. It was 70% all through up until Reagan, and then now it's 35. And so, sure, there is a significant amount of money. Now, there probably isn't enough, even with all of that. Even if you rolled back to Carter era tax rates on the top 1%,
Which was
well, that would have been a 70% top bracket. Although not everybody now.
But not on all of their income. But also, a lot of people don't count. I mean,
right.
Rich, biggest earners don't. It's not really income, right? It's
well, that's yeah. If you're a hedge fund manager, somehow your income. That drives me crazy, right? They say, well, it's earned income and it should be taxed as earned income, but somehow they manage to call it capital gains.
Right.
And then people say, well, but that's it's uncertain. They put in a lot of effort and they don't know how it's going to pay off. And I say, I know a number of professions like that, like that textbook author, right? And I don't get to pay 15% on my royalties.
Right.
But there is. So look, I think if we roll back specifically, we probably need in the end 4 or 5% of GDP. In addition to controlling healthcare costs, we probably in the end are going to need 4 or 5% of GDP in cuts and other stuff, or probably mostly revenue to bring this thing under control. That you cannot actually get that much just by taxing the rich. If we allow the Bush tax cuts to expire for the rich on schedule, that's actually 0.7% of GDP, which is not trivial, but it's not going to solve the whole thing.
And where are we now in that scale? We have to get to 5. You said we need to get to 4 or 5, and where are we now?
Oh no, I'm saying we need to add 4
we
or 5
need
to
to
where
add
we are.
4 or 5 to where we are
now.
Okay.
So 3 might do it, or you probably 3 on revenue, and then a little bit we can.
But the Bush tax cuts get you less than 1%.
No, the Bush tax cuts if they had never been passed, that's actually 2. If you could do away with the whole thing, that's actually 2. But the high-end parts are just
wouldn't be in Iraq,
just a third of it.
There would be no Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah, a lot of other stuff, and even now aside from Afghanistan, which is starting to add up to serious money, $10 billion here, $10 billion there, and eventually we still, our military, I've talked to people who actually do this stuff, and they say, we still are spending a significant amount of money basically preparing to stop the Soviet tanks from rolling across the North German plain. So, if we stop, there's a lot of waste.
But there are no tanks there, you'll notice.
So that's the point.
Like polar bear repellent.
Everybody talks about waste in government. If you ask what part has the most clear-cut, significant waste, where you really probably are talking about 20 or 30%, it would be defense.
Well, how much could you get? How much of that 3% do you think you could get out of
You
defense?
get probably max 1%, but that's
So
again, you add it up.
You're left with a percentage point or two.
Or 2 or 3,
which has to come from some combination of cuts, but
and there's some other stuff that's coming
discretionary
along.
spending. You can eliminate the whole thing.
Right, discretionary
and it won't
spending.
make a difference, right?
Non-security discretionary spending, which is all that they're debating in Washington right now, is 2.8% of GDP. And that's everything. That's operating the buildings. That's operating that's the courts. It's going where the money isn't, and
Right.
it's already pretty thin. I mean, you do not actually get rich working for the federal government unless you're a contractor. Right.
So you give your advice to the president fairly regularly on what he should do about this stuff. What do you think? I mean, suppose it were possible for you to sit down and have a nice, polite conversation like this with the Republican leadership.
Right.
And they
Yeah.
promise not to arrest you or run you over with a train
Right.
or something like that. What would you tell them? I mean, what is it, or is it just all wrong?
Well, I mean, yeah, the thing is that the Republican leadership is, they know what they want. And what they want is not a lower deficit. What they want is essentially to roll back the Great Society and the New Deal.
Right.
And so all of my suggestions about how we can, have restore a sustainable budget without rolling back the Great Society and the New Deal is not something they're interested in. So there really isn't it's fundamentally not a question of differences in analysis. It's a question of differences in your vision of what this country ought to be.
It's an ideological division.
Yeah.
Which brings us to Egypt, Wisconsin.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's talk about Wisconsin. I saw the other day, I saw this on the internet, so it has to be true.
Right.
That there's starting to be some wavering among the Republicans. Did you see this? There were a couple of people they mentioned, Rob Cowles. I don't know who these people are. But they're starting to get a little nervous about the fact that nothing is happening and that it's starting to dawn on them that there's two parts of what Walker's doing. One is maybe about money, and the other is just purely about getting rid of unions. It's got nothing to do with
So Wisconsin, like every state, just about every state, has a budget problem. States, unlike the federal government, don't have the ability to borrow without going through some fancy maneuvering. So the state has a budget gap. It's a pretty mild budget gap. It's the numbers I look at say that it's significantly less trouble. Wisconsin has significantly less trouble than New York, and vastly less trouble than New Jersey. It's not in the group of states that's got really severe budget problems, but they have a new Republican governor who has decided to use the budget problem as an axe, as a club with which to beat not only public sector pay, which you do expect to see some givebacks, and in fact the unions in Wisconsin have said they're willing to do that, but to destroy public sector unions, to basically eliminate representation, to turn Wisconsin into Texas as far as the public sector employees are concerned. It's looking as if he overreached. It's looking as if he went with the belief that the public in general hates public sector workers and hates their unions. And it also turns out there's a parliamentary maneuver that the Democrats pulled, which is you can't actually pass anything in the Wisconsin Senate without a quorum. And so all the Democrats, by simply leaving the state, have denied the quorum. So it's a stalemate. Now, the thing that everyone's been expecting the Democrats to eventually cave and just come back, which is what happened in a fight in Texas, which was somewhat similar, over redistricting.
Right.
But it turns out, and that may still happen, but it turns out first of all, there's a lot of support. So for the Democrats, the fugitive Democrats, they're not about to run out of food, and it also turns out that not only is it this power play proving extremely unpopular in Wisconsin, but it turns out there is a recall mechanism, and you can't go after the governor until next year, apparently, but you can go after state senators. And some of the Republican state senators are people who were swept in normally Democratic districts in the 2010 wave, and might actually lose a recall election. And so it's an interesting thing. We might see a collapse of the support for this. I don't know. Now we're into not just details of political maneuvering, but Wisconsin state political maneuvering, and even Gail doesn't know anything about that. I don't think.
Can you imagine? It's so ironic that it's in Wisconsin. I always think of Wisconsin as sort of more liberal, and they have funny hats. And
a lot of things. This is a different. The country has changed a lot. Yeah, Wisconsin is classic progressive state, but that was a long, long time ago.
That was a million years ago. There was a great article here too from, I don't know where, I cut and pasted it. But it says that at least 3 of the Wisconsin, it may have been from from Ezra Klein actually, possibly.
Yeah.
No, maybe Huffington Post. I don't know. Have you noticed you don't know where anything is anymore? You don't know what channel your programs are on. It's all just Google.
Right.
It's unbelievable. At least 3 of the Wisconsin State Senate Republicans currently demanding that public workers sacrifice benefits, wages, and collective bargaining rights for the sake of the budget have applied for and received hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal farm subsidies. Oh, it's Huffington Post, yeah.
Yeah. Oh well, that sort of thing is so
typical.
That's America. I mean, that's
right. The 3 states in our region here, the one we both live in, right, New Jersey, and Connecticut and New York are going through different versions of this. Talk about them a bit. The governor of Connecticut is trying a different approach. He's trying to raise taxes, and he's trying to cut, and he's trying to do these other things. Christie is running for president, and denying it, because the louder they deny it, right. And Andrew Cuomo, no one really knows what he's up to exactly.
Yeah. So I'm actually not paying as much attention to the local stuff as I should, and it's a kind of a weird thing because I don't live in New York, and so don't pay that much attention. But then it's very hard to focus New Jersey is a very hard state to focus because the 2 principal cities of New Jersey are New York and Philadelphia, and it really is kind of hard to. So. But New Jersey is a real mess. New Jersey is really, it's been hit hard. The unemployment rate is actually significantly higher than it is in New York. I'm not entirely sure why, but somehow but I think largely I think because New York City has actually held up surprisingly well in this crisis. And New Jersey revenue has been hit hard, and you had a long streak in the 90s of irresponsible government. So New Jersey began raiding its pension fund long before everybody else did. So it's in relatively dire straits, but it's a rich state. So actually a balanced solution of cuts and tax increases should allow it to weather, but Christie refuses to do anything on taxes.
Right.
And so.
Well, he's willing to tax poor people who take the bus.
Well, that's just so yeah. So actually, this little thing here is going to cost you more, because my
which little thing? This?
Yes, because they eliminated the off-peak fares on New Jersey Transit, and so I think I ended up paying $14 instead of $10 to get in here.
Is that right?
Yeah.
My assistant's commute went up like $150 a month.
Yeah,
and she's not poor, but that's just ridiculous. He came in, he campaigned as a low-tax, small government Republican and raised taxes immediately on the elderly and the working poor.
Well, it's the funny thing about, all right.
I'm sorry, we shouldn't attack Christie, but what about, there's a lot of, should we?
Well.
And I don't know, this is a political question, not an economic one, but so far this stuff works politically. I mean, Christie has become the darling of the Republican Party, and everybody's talking about him running, and he is demonizing teachers, and he's demonizing public schools, and he's...
Well, this has been a funny thing. This is where it's been really weird. If you look at the polling, they actually suggest that the public doesn't like this demonizing of public workers, and it's not a popular policy. And there is, it can sound too much like a ranting alternative journalist, but there is this Beltway bubble, where inside Washington, everyone knows that it's a wildly successful strategy, that you're going to get lots of votes by attacking public sector workers. And the fact that poll after poll, Times poll, was among them, says that that's not actually what the public believes, doesn't seem to penetrate. So you find a lot of news analysis pieces starting from the premise that Christie has discovered political gold by going after the public sector unions. And the fact that the polling says that ain't so doesn't seem to affect the perception, which might mean that he ends up as Republican nominee for president just because enough of the political professionals and of course the primary voters in the GOP believe that, but then might have a rude shock when he discovers that actually that's not a successful campaign thing to run on.
But you can't always count on people voting in their own interest, right?
That's right. But you can
it
count
goes back
on
to this question of why middle-class people who've lost their jobs and have been, hosed for 30 years by Republican policies continue to vote Republican.
Well, yeah. So
that's my opinion. Anyway.
National elections are determined primarily again by what happened to the economy in the 6 months, the direction of the 6 months before the election. But the notion that this is put this way, there was a sort of assumption, still which is still somewhat prevalent, which is that school teachers are the welfare queens driving Cadillacs of the 21st century. And I think that the trouble is that school teachers, there are actual school teachers, whereas there were no, in fact, Cadillac driving welfare queens, and people know them, and it's a little harder to demonize them when all is said and done. So I think this is not going to win.
Well, this idea that Jon Stewart did this thing the other night where he showed 50 people in succession saying on Fox News that teachers are paid more than everybody else and they get 3 months off. Is this true?
No. So the many studies, right? So it turns out that you actually do somewhat better working for the public sector if you're a janitor. That the lowest paid workers actually are paid a little bit better by the public sector.
Than the lowest paid workers in the
private
sector?
sector.
In the private sector, but
right.
not than the private sector in general, right? But
right. No. So
by their counterparts.
Then their counterparts in the private sector. Right. No. So janitor for janitor, the janitor cleaning, Megacorp Inc. Is probably paid less than the janitor cleaning City Hall. Mm-hmm. But the school teacher who has a college degree and then some is actually on average being paid a little bit less than someone with equivalent amount of education in the private sector. And so you look, the average pay of public sector employees is somewhat higher than the average pay of private sector employees, but that's because public sector employees are basically school teachers. Roughly half of public sector employees in this country are school teachers, and they're people with a college education and a master's degree besides. So once you adjust for education level, the thing disappears. It's actually slightly, within measurement error, but it looks like basically public sector workers are not overpaid. They're, if anything, very slightly underpaid.
What do you think about the idea of on the schools? And again, I'm sorry, I live in New Jersey, so I'm obsessed with this, and I have kids in public school. Christie wants to divert he's taking $1 billion now, he wants to divert another $1 billion from public education to private education. Yeah. And this is this voucher argument, that you should give people alternatives. It's a net drain, obviously, on the public schools.
Yeah, and it's one of those ideas.
What's wrong with it?
What are toned technically as zombie ideas, because you kill them and they keep on coming back. Voucher systems,
want to eat your brains, right?
Privately run education is one of those things that, there have been many tests. It never actually seems to deliver the results they're promised, but people know it must deliver those results, and so they just keep on proposing it again and again. Now, I'll tell you, in New Jersey, what is true is there are too many municipalities,
too many
school districts. Yes, right. Absolutely. I mean, Princeton. There's Princeton Township, which I live in. There's Princeton Borough, and geographically, the township is a donut, and the borough is the whole. And they have separate governments, separate administrations, and there's a lot of that in New Jersey. It's just too many.
There are towns there's a town near us, Signac or something, that's entirely surrounded by another town that's equally small.
So it's So
and they each have a fire department, and
there are real savings there. But when all is said and done, if you ask where do state budgets go? They pay a fair bit on compensation of employees, but that's not most of the budget. Most of the budget, as with the federal government, where it's totally true, goes for Medicaid, It goes for various kinds of, so there's school teacher salaries and there's Medicaid, and that's basically where state and local spending goes. And the notion that we're gonna bash the teacher salaries and that's going to make a tremendous change in the budget is just wrong.
Have you had a chance to look at? There's been a Medicaid reform panel in New York, and they've come out with some recommendations.
No, I haven't done
so I
that
won't
one.
put you on the spot, but one of them is medical malpractice. This comes up every year. And how, let's stipulate that, there's an interesting study that found I can't remember who did this, but we were talking about it in our editorial board, about somebody that had this amazing drop in obstetric medical malpractice suits because they stopped actually committing malpractice. They started the very strenuous kind of quality controls and so on, and that brought down their medical malpractice. But how big is it? Leaving New York aside, how big of it?
The premiums on medical malpractice are something like 1% of the total expenses of doctors on the insurance. Now the argument is, well, it may be bigger than that because because doctors practice defensive medicine for fear of suits. But at least the serious. So I actually teach a class on the economics of the welfare state, and so we just did extensive thing on costs of medical care and why does the United States cost so much more than any place else, and it doesn't. That issue doesn't seem to be bulk large at all. What really is going on, as best we can tell, is in the U.S. system there are very strong financial incentives to proliferate procedures, tests. Your doctor, each of you, your personal doctor is a totally ethical guy. But what you need to know is that typically that MRI is being carried out at an outpatient facility which is owned by your doctor and his partners. And so our system really creates an incentive to proliferate. There's too much surgery, there's too many tests. And all of that leads to, so that's not defensive medicine. That's actually offensive medicine. That's people doing stuff not because they're afraid of a lawsuit, but because they actually make some money off it.
Because they own the machines and the insurance companies.
The insurance companies pay for it, and we had one brief period from roughly 1993 to 2000 when healthcare costs leveled off. And that was because of the rise of HMOs. But the HMOs were squeezing, and people began getting upset with their HMOs and began actually filing lawsuits, not because there isn't a lot of excess medicine going on, but because very few of us, me included, trust a profit-making insurance company to make the decisions about what is actually appropriate. So that's all tied up with our system. If you were going to You need someone who is not profit motive. You need medical professionals who are disinterested to decide what kinds of things are going to be done, and we haven't found a way to do that in this country.
The president has taken a few steps sort of that have been portrayed either as backing down or offering room for negotiation. He told the governors that they could come up with alternative.
That one actually appears to be a clever move. For once, I approve.
For once, you think he's doing the right thing?
Yeah, because it's states that can come up with alternatives are free to do so, provided it covers as many people at no higher cost as the plan. And there's actually, as far as I know, only one serious state plan under discussion that might actually do that, which is that Vermont is considering single-payer health care. So what he's actually done is open the door for socialized medicine.
Isn't their senator a communist?
No. He's
one of them anyway.
No, he's a
Bernard.
He's a socialist, which is like a communist, but without the discipline.
Having covered the Soviet Union for 4 years in the mid-'80s, it always kills me when Americans talk about socialism.
Yeah.
There are no socialists, there are no communists in this country. There's only capitalists with a small c and capitalists with a capital C. But whatever.
Yeah.
Mitt Romney's and what the Massachusetts plan? Have you looked?
Yeah,
at
the Massachusetts
good
plan.
Right now, he's trying to walk away from it. Or?
Yeah, I mean, as we've been saying, Obamacare is basically Romney care.
Right.
It is. It's the same logic. It was to a large extent developed by some of the same people, including my former colleague John Gruber at MIT. And it's, if you work with the constraint that you're going to provide more or less universal coverage without replacing the private insurance companies, and let's just say, the life being the way it is, that's the only way it was going to happen. then there's a certain route that you pretty much have to follow, which is you pretty much have to have community rating. You can't deny insurance based on pre-existing conditions. But then that leads to big problems unless you couple it with a mandate so that everyone is required to get insurance. And that doesn't work unless you have subsidies so that people who can't otherwise afford can buy the insurance. And that's, you've now got a three-legged stool that pulls the thing together. That is the Massachusetts plan. It's also the way the Obama plan works. And so it's the same thing. Romney is, there's some debate about whether he's the Romney that we're now seeing is Romney 3.0 or Romney 4.0.
Maybe he's in beta.
But he's,
He seems to have
it's
lost
a
the
sad
dog.
thing.
The dog is gone, though.
The dog is gone. But he's a clearly intelligent guy who is willing to say whatever he thinks might get him the presidency. And the trouble is, it shows. And I think that there's a sort of the insincerity just radiates, and I think which is why I don't think he's ever going to be president.
Yeah, his new thing is now that he tried it before. It's not all that new. The corporate executive thing,
Yeah.
And they say things like, and maybe you can help us with this because I'm confused too. That the Republicans like him like to say that Barack Obama has no idea how to create a job. Well, I don't have any idea how to create a job other than ask my boss for more money and hire someone.
Right.
Which I don't think is what he has in mind. So does that mean anything?
No, and by the way, I've got a vested interest here, but I'm going to say it anyway, which is that business executives in general have no idea how to run an economy, right?
Right.
They know how to run a business. I would never, well, some, right?
Yeah.
But it's a very different task. I mean, basically, if you're a corporate executive and you manage to find a way to eliminate 100,000 workers and cast them into the outer darkness while producing the same amount of stuff, or maybe less stuff, but sell it at a higher price, that's a win. If you do that to a national economy, you've created a massive unemployment problem, and this is the issues are very different. And the idea that you turn to business leaders, I actually once did some reading. Looking at reading issues of like Fortune magazine from 1930, 1931 to see what the leading business people were saying, and they were completely clueless. It was given what we now know about what was going on in the Great Depression, their notions were completely wrong. It was all need to have more pain. We need to get rid of the deadwood. It was. It's being a CEO of a corporation is very good.
Right?
What?
The deadwood is people.
That's right. This is it's one of my favorite Dilberts, where they say that we had a change in our corporate slogan. We've been saying that people are our most important resource, but we actually did the accounting, and actually they're only number 8.
There's a phrase, there's this kind of coldness to this. Whenever we talk about the unemployment rate, inevitably some article says the economy shed 8,000 jobs or something.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, those are actual human beings, right? Or is it more
That's
statistical than that?
No, they're real people. I mean, actually, yeah, in any given month, the economy is losing lots and lots of jobs and then gaining a smaller number, or at this point now a larger number. But yeah, this is real people. But actually, you of all people should know. I think the reason why people like that particular turn of phrase is it's only 4 characters, and leaves more room for other stuff in the piece.
Shed.
Yeah,
that's true. Particularly if you're going to tweet it.
Yes, I actually.
Paul doesn't tweet, by the way.
Although some computer does on my behalf.
There is a computer that we love. I don't think it has a name, but it takes every one of Paul's columns and every one of his blog entries and makes a Twitter thingy out of it, and it has 680,000 followers or something like that.
Yeah.
But no human being ever touches this thing.
Yeah. I was going to say
It's popular.
The president of the Minneapolis Fed, who's an interesting guy, I think very wrong on the issues, but an interesting guy. But I almost always refuse to quote him in the column because his name is Narayana Kocherlakota.
Oh, it's just too long.
And that's half my column is gone.
I always tell people use a lot of words with I's and L's in them and avoid W's and M's because they take up more space. How's Tim Geithner doing?
Okay, Geithner he's he's a very smart, very skillful, very, has the pulse of the markets very well. He's also very, very cautious. And I think, and the trouble, I actually think he and the president are soulmates. I've actually, that's the impression I've actually had from watching interactions. And the president is like that too. And the trouble is, when you're faced with the greatest economic crisis in 70 years, you really want not, light touch. Let's do just enough to avoid catastrophe. You really wanted aggressive policies, and we didn't get that. So I've been unhappy. I don't think Geithner's a bad guy, but I think in a way I wish we had had somebody prepared to just take some really big swings, even at the risk of missing, rather than somebody who's going to be as careful as he is. And so I've been unhappy, but not at the level of, that he's a villain, but just I think there was a huge missed opportunity in the first few months of the Obama administration. And I put that down to Geithner, but essentially he's reflecting the president.
Well, the president sets the policies, presumably.
Yeah, well, but he has, there's a lot of technical stuff, so he does have to rely on the people who know the stuff. But they click. This is a similar style.
Somebody once asked, I think it was Jimmy Carter, is he enunciating policy or just personal opinion when he speaks? But I think Obama is much more hands-on.
No,
But they placed very little or no priority on homeowners in the beginning, even now.
The homeownership, that's actually exactly the kind of thing I would talk about. The homeowners, mortgage relief. Mm-hmm. Mortgage relief is, on the one hand, it's central. The whole problem of mortgage debts and so on is central. It's pretty obvious that what ought to be happening is that we ought to be having quite a lot of principal reduction. We ought to be having a lot of.
I'm glad you said that, because it's not just reducing interest rates.
Right, not just cutting the interest rates, not just buying time. The whole, the HAPless program, the HAMP program that was supposed to help people was just basically buying time. But instead, this house that somebody bought has fallen 50% in value. There's no way they can actually manage to pay the mortgage, but on the other hand, actually foreclosing on them is actually a bad thing from everybody's point of view. So let's reduce the mortgage level to something they can actually pay. That's what you really want it to be doing. Now, doing that is insanely complex and very difficult, and the legalities are tricky, and the funding is tricky. And what we had, as best my understanding is that basically Geithner and other people in the administration said to the president, this is really very hard. I think we might get in trouble if we do this. And so they sort of backed off it instead of saying, well, damn it, we're going to do this. And we may have some court fights, and we may have people yelling, and Rick Santelli will rant some more on CNBC. But we really need to make it happen. And so they have not, in fact, achieved any significant relief for homeowners. And you try to argue this with them, and they say, well, you don't understand all of the technical difficulties.
Right.
And the answer is right, I don't understand. But I do believe that with a more forceful approach, they could have just bulldozed through some of those difficulties.
Would it be paranoid to draw a connection between the fact that many of these people worked for banks previously and will work for banks again, and these policies?
I think that there's less, I don't think there's a lot of raw corruption in this administration. I mean, there have been, there certainly has, think about the fact that the person who put together the Bush drug benefit immediately resigned from Congress and went to work as the chief lobbyist for the pharmaceutical industry. That's raw corruption. But
and we're talking here about
Billy Townsend.
Yes, right.
But I don't think that was what was happening.
That's not what's going on here.
I think it's more a kind of acculturation. You get kind of assimilated by the Wall Street board. These are the people you hang out with. They're the people you hung out with before you took your current job, the people you hang out with later, and you tend to think that their view of the world makes sense. Mm-hmm. I'm in enough meetings like that, quite aside from the administration, to see how it happens. There are all these guys, and they've got much better tailors than you do, and you just sort of start to think that they must know something.
Well, they know where the good tailors are.
Yeah.
I walked the other day, I went to a screening of a film downtown. I walked past a Maserati dealership on whatever street, Varick Street. I was thinking, huh? Yeah. But financial reform.
Yeah.
scale of 1 to 10, how much have they done? Well, Geithner, I think, speaking of Geithner, has just recently or is about to provide some exemptions for derivatives from market transparency and trading that seem to us at least to be dangerous, if not really bad.
Yeah, so let me tell you, the financial reform, I'm not sure I can even give you the scale of 1 to 10 because it's a trick. So let me tell you what the problem is. The trouble is that the core issue involves what we now call shadow banks. We know how to regulate a big marble building with rows of tellers. But the trouble is that on the eve of the crisis, more than half of what was, for all practical purposes, banking didn't look like that. It was institutions that did not take deposits, so they were not subject to FDIC and all of these things. They were instead issuing short-term paper, which was being treated as if it was cash, and using that to finance investments. And so it would have been everything from Lehman Brothers being the most famous shadow bank to fail to auction rate securities that were being used to finance expansions at the Metropolitan Museum. All of that stuff it's much harder to write regulations. How do you even decide what is a bank, what is not a bank? So the Financial Reform Bill adopted a not stupid approach to this, which is it adopted a pornography standard. We'll know them when we see them. It established a committee of top the Treasury, the Fed, and some others who would identify systemically important institutions, basically stuff that could bring the economy down if several of them went down together, and would apply regulations to them quite similar to the way we regulate ordinary banks. Plus regulations on derivatives, and again, the question is exactly what counts as something to be regulated, and that's kind of judgmental. So they created something which basically gave, and resolution authority, which would give a clear-cut legal path for seizing an institution. One of the questions, there was a point when there was serious discussion about nationalizing Citigroup temporarily, which I still think they should have done, but in any case, one of the obstacles was that it wasn't quite clear what the legal authority was. We knew how to seize Citibank, which is the regular bank part of it, because that's the law there is established, but this complicated financial thingy, now I thought it could have been done using the Vito Corleone technique. You make an offer for the stock. Is
financial thingy? That's what you economists say when you're together.
Right. No, people definitely talk that way. If you think it's highly formal, we were. But anyway, but the point was, so you got all these things, and we have a system that, under management that really, really wants to rein in the financial sector and wants to make sure that we don't run wild again, can work. The tools are now in place. So it depends upon, but it's a system that requires kind of active leadership at the top. So I was saying that Tim Geithner, with Tim Geithner and Ben Bernanke, I think it's probably going to be okay. After the stuff with derivatives, I'm not even sure about that. Mm-hmm. But what you know is that it's a system that doesn't work at all once President Palin appoints Ron Paul as Treasury Secretary. So whereas the FDIC will still be operating. So it's a system that has no automaticity in it. It's a system that's very much judgmental. So I don't know how to have, it wasn't easy to write it differently. So I understand. I mean, remember Barney Frank did a lot of this, and he's no fool, and he's serious about doing this stuff. And there's a reason why it looks the way it did, because they could not come up with simple rules that would work. But it worries me because it really depends. It depends on having good, well-intentioned activist people at the top, and we can't always count on having that.
No, we've seen that in the past. Yeah. One of the things I do when I drive home at night is listen to a guy named Mark Levin. I don't know if anybody here probably does.
Oh gosh, tougher man than I am.
Well, I like to hear what I don't agree with. It makes me feel better. But also, he was the first person I heard about the Tea Party from. So he's got his finger on the pulse of something that's so far to the right of the right that it doesn't even have a name. And I had a point to all of this, but I can't remember what the hell it was. Just before this, I went on the internet to get questions. I Twittered it, but then I realized I had no followers. And my 8 friends on Facebook refused to respond. So I had Nick Kristof Twitter the fact that we were doing this, and then suddenly I started getting questions. One person wanted to know if we were going to reach a Plato in the next year or so. I think he means plateau, but we've talked about that. There's one person that wants to know if you want to write for the Turkish Daily Star, which I gather is a... but let me ask you the one specific question, and just this one, because it's so an odd topic that probably no one will ask about, and is wondering if you think the change of government will change the economic outlook in Ireland.
Unfortunately, no. So, no, it's an interesting election, right? This is actually clear what my colleagues at Princeton call retrospective voting. They threw out Fianna, I can never pronounce it, but they threw out one party and replaced it with another party who have been, bitter opponents throughout the history of the Irish Republic, and apparently have no difference on actual substantive policy. So they've got a new government that is different people, but in fact has no... Now that Labour is in the coalition, and they would like to... But in practice, I think they're not going to change it. I think events are going to change it, because I think what's happening in Ireland is unworkable. They have they took on they guaranteed the debt of the banks. So Ireland came into the crisis with very little debt, budget surplus, but a huge, huge bubble in their economy. The bubble burst. The banks, which had gone wild, were in enormous trouble. And right away, they stepped in to guarantee all of the debt of the banks, which suddenly turned this low debt, budget surplus country into a country with a crushing burden of government debt. And in order to pay that debt and to make it credible that they would pay the debt, they imposed savage austerity, huge cuts in public spending, which led to the recession, which was already terrible, getting even deeper. And there is hardly any plausible path to making this thing work. So I think in the end, whoever's in power will, in the end, have to do a default. There will be a debt reduction, and the markets think so too, right? The Irish debt is 9.5% or something as of this morning, and which everyone is saying they will never ever do. But I think that's what's going to happen, but not because of the change of government. The change of government was really a throw the bums out and get a bunch of basically identical
Same
bums
kind of
in.
Bums,
yeah. So a little bit of meta here. Writing a twice-weekly column, there's always the question, how much am I trying to sway the debate right now about what we're going to do, and how much is kind of long-term foundation building? And I think probably the temptation is to write too many pieces that are about the piece of legislation currently before Congress, or about what the president said yesterday. And probably it would be, I probably haven't said enough. I mean, God knows, I was among the people screaming loudest when the Bush tax cuts were coming in, and was very, I wanted, I thought Obama should have been willing to risk the government shutdown even over this latest tax deal, because I fear that those high-end tax cuts will end up becoming permanent because of what he did. But yeah, probably should be doing it more. There's at some point, well, all I can say is of course, if you write, how many columns have I written at this point? Probably 100 a year. So I've written over 1,000 columns for the Times. Wow. And anything you think I should have mentioned, I probably did somewhere in there. But that doesn't mean I've done it enough.
Judging by my mail, he's irritated a couple of Republicans along the way.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming. It's always... It's great to hear. It's great to hear the applause, I guess. It's always great.